By definition, total volume can be calculated like that. However, if you want to use your volume as a tool to maximize your gains, then this definition can be pretty misleading. Including work that doesn't generate enough stimulus for muscle growth in this calculation is basically pointless. For example, before your first exercise, you might do 5 or 6 warm-up sets that doesn't generate direct muscle growth. Are you gonna include those sets in your total volume numbers? Probably not. In order to get a clear answer on how to calculate your total volume, you have to ask yourself, what causes muscle hypertrophy? Well, the one thing that all the studies and all the fitness programs have in common is high training intensity. In the context of hypertrophy training, high intensity translates to basically sets taking close to failure. Since reps and weight depend on each other to train with adequate intensity, we calculate and adjust our volume primarily through the number of sets we do. So when we talk about a high volume program, we are referring to one with a high amount of sets taking close to failure. Now, the question that everybody seems to be worried about is how many sets are optimal. Well, that's very variable and depends to a ton of factors, like the specific muscle group, the exercise selection, the individual and his goals, and many, many more. Sorry to disappoint you, but there is no single answer to that. However, there are some things that you can do in order to find out what works best for you and for your body. More sets typically mean more stimulus and therefore more growth, but you can only recover from a certain amount of sets, right? Well, yes, but recent findings suggest that we can recover from a much higher amount of sets than we previously thought. A study showed that building your volume up to 56 sets per week for your quads might actually have positive hypertrophy effects. So the more volume you're gradually putting in, the best growth you will see. To be clear, I'm not saying that just because a recent study showed that this is the way to go. It's just food for thought, for being open-minded and not cap yourself just because some dude in the gym told you that you can only recover from 20 or 25 sets per week for a certain muscle group. Great, then you can just start at 10 sets per week for every muscle group and gradually build up your volume until you reach 30 or even 40 sets for all the muscle groups on your body, right? Well, that would be great, but in that case, the limiting factor won't be your specific muscle groups anymore, but your systemic recoverability, meaning how many sets or volume your body can handle in total. In the mentioned study, subjects were training exclusively their quads, focusing all the recovery resources in one muscle group. Hence, the superior hypertrophy results in such high volumes. Imagine your systemic recoverability as a barrel that can hold 100 glasses of liquid. The glasses have 3 sizes, just as different exercises generate different amounts of fatigue. Each set equals 1 glass. You have to distribute your sets among different exercises and muscle groups, but the total amount shouldn't exceed your barrel's total capacity. Now, how can you take advantage of all that nonsense, since the relation between extra sets and extra muscle growth is not linear, and the more sets you do, the less extra muscle you grow, but with the same systemic loading, it is better to train all your muscle groups at a more moderate volume, around 10 to 20 sets per week. This way you achieve a decent amount of growth for all your muscle groups while you are still managing your systemic load and fatigue. This approach works well for intermediate lifters who are genetically gifted in terms of recoverability, and for beginners who can handle higher amount of volumes by default. If you are in either category, then try to fit 10 to 20 sets for each muscle group per week and work your weaker parts at the upper part of the range and your stronger parts at the lower part of the range. You are gonna see amazing results as long as you're trained properly. For those struggling with that high total volumes, we need a more sophisticated approach, prioritizing muscle groups in order to get the desired results without overflowing the barrel. This means increasing your volume only for some muscle groups at any given program. How many groups you're going to be able to prioritize at any given time really depend on you and your individual recoverability and the systemic fatigue that the prioritizing muscle groups are generating. For example, I can prioritize my calves, traps, pecs, side delts, and biceps at any given time, but if I prioritize my quads and my back, I cannot really focus on anything else because both my quad and my back training are generating a ton of systemic fatigue. In order to determine what works best for you, you have to invest some time and observe how your body responds to different amounts of volume. Pay attention to your pump, your soreness and feeling during and after your session, and more importantly, to your progress. The more sets you can fit into your week while still making progress, the better growth you will see. Over time, you will get a rough idea of which of your muscles respond better in higher volumes and which good enough in low or moderate volumes. For example, I see a huge difference between 10 and 20 sets for my pecs, which grow better at higher volumes. While for my quads, I've noticed that they grow just well at 6 to 12 sets, with no remarkable growth difference when pushing closer to 15 or 20. Quad training involves heavy squats and leg presses, generating significant amounts of systemic fatigue. Based on this, I keep my quad volume relatively low, allowing me to spend the extra recovery capacity on other muscle groups that are falling behind, like my arms. This doesn't mean that I will train my quads with relatively low volume forever. There will still be phases where I'm prioritizing my legs and I'm pushing my quad volume closer to 15 or 20 sets per week. But this happens once every 3 or 4 years for 5 to 6 months, just to let my quads keep up with the rest of my body. Back to the barrel example, your goal when you're playing around with your volume is to find the combination that yields the best growth out of that 100 set barrel. Let's see what is the best way, in my opinion obviously, to explore your volume tolerance. Start as low as possible at around 6 to 10 sets per week, depending on the muscle group. Smaller muscle groups like biceps and side delts can handle higher amount of volumes, generally speaking, and larger ones like quads and glutes can handle lower, but that's really variable. Pick 2 or 3 muscle groups that you feel that are lacking and add 2 sets per week. For the rest, add just 1. Each week, before your first training session, you have to make a decision for each muscle group. If the previous week felt really hard on your pecs and they were pumped during all the sessions and they were sore almost every day of the week and the training itself felt really challenging, then on the next week, just stick to the same amount of sets. You don't have to increase. But if not, then add 2 or 1, depending on whether it's a weak or a strong point. If you keep doing that week after week, you will reach a point where you cannot really progress anymore. That's when you take a delayed week and then you come back, starting all over again, but with lower volume. This approach lets you increase your volume gradually, and eventually you will figure out what are the volume numbers that work best for you and what is your volume plateau point, at least for the foreseeable future. Be conservative with your volume increments. You are already getting most of the benefits just by training close to failure. It is better to add sets only when you really feel that your current volume is insufficient. When measuring your total sets, account for synergistic muscle groups. If you are doing 10 sets of bench press and 5 sets of overhead press and you want to increase your tricep volume, remember that your triceps are also working on those 15 sets. Experiment with a volume of 2 to 3 muscle groups at a time. Once you get the sense of how to navigate your volumes, you can try 4 or 5. Paralysis by analysis can be a real thing in bodybuilding. There are hundreds of studies popping up every year, and even though I believe that science is the only way to find the truth about something, all these studies do not account for the individuality aspect of the bodybuilding training. They can only provide you with a great starting point, but you have to try and diverge from that. Because what is optimal for the average person is 100% suboptimal for you, even by a small margin. It all comes down to one thing. There is not such thing as correct volume. You have to experiment, pay attention, and monitor how your body responds to different amount of sets. You are going to get most of the benefits just by training close to failure with proper execution and controlled tempo anyways. And experimenting with your volume is just an optimization that can bring you a small amount of extra gains. If you got any value out of the video, drop a like and subscribe for more. Cheers!